All right. So I'm introducing Jamie McMichael Phillips, who's going to introduce the panel and the moderator. And let's kick off the Seabed 2030, session 4.1, take one. And only one.
And I won't add fuel to the fire on any more of your jokes. Okay, so welcome. Thank you very much to the NOC team for such fantastic speedy manoeuvring to get us here. Thanks to Matt Gatz, and also thanks to the football club. Not being a football supporter, I think I might start now. So anyway, we're very lucky to have been given two sessions this afternoon to talk about Seabed 2030 aspects. The first one is looking at a world mapped beyond 2030, and then the second session is looking at partnerships as a force multiplier to accelerate ocean mapping. You're going to hear no more from me now. I'm going to hand over to Aileen Bohan, who's going to moderate both sessions, largely because our second moderator, Shireen, has just stepped off a flight from Perth, and we're not going to be unfair to her and make a moderate session this afternoon, much rather be sleeping, hopefully. So, over to Aileen. Aileen is a marine geologist. She's a hydrographer. She is a graduate of the Nippon Foundation JEBCO Ocean Mapping course run at the University of New Hampshire. She works for Infomar Geological Survey of Ireland. And over to Aileen. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone, and welcome to our first panel of the afternoon on looking at a map world beyond 2030. So what we really want with this session is to have a look at a glimpse into what mapping will bring to us for the future. So today we're talking on our panel today. We're going to have David Miller starting off from Foodgrow. We'll then have Steve Hall from Seabed 2030. We'll have Nick Lambert from NLA International. Before finishing off with about 10 minutes of a few questions that we have for them to answer. So I think we're going to, if David Miller is ready, we're going to start with David Miller. I'm sure I'll let David Miller introduce himself.
I need to see my slides.
Yes.
Do you mind if I just kind of walk over there and look back at the slides? I'm hopefully walking anybody. Is this okay?
Yeah.
So I'm David Miller. I'm with Foodgrow, and I've been involved with Seabed 2030 since its inception, and I'm a member of the JEBCO Guiding Committee. This afternoon, I'm very pleased to be here, so thanks to NOC for hosting this event and to Seabed 2030 for the opportunity to participate in this session. I'll be talking about collaboration and what does the future of ocean mapping look like. So next slide, please. Collaboration allows us to know more than we are capable of knowing by ourselves. I think that's critically important. We've obviously heard about collaboration. This morning I'm going to be pulling on some themes that were raised by both Jen and Duncan here in this presentation. So starting here, looking at the way that ocean mapping has historically been done. And we have these various sectors, and they have historically funded their own mapping initiatives to support their own needs only. So I think we all recognize that this has kind of historically been the approach. A lot of activity from various sectors, but not necessarily great coordination or sharing of that information. So you have all of these actors from various sectors that are making their own investments for their own purposes, and then bringing their data into their organization, but not necessarily extending that beyond. Of course, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, this has been the model for decades and probably centuries, right? Next slide. So I really considered the Forum for Future Ocean Floor Mapping back in 2016 as a transformational moment in ocean mapping. And I had the privilege of participating in that forum, as many in this room probably did as well. But it really brought together, I think, 150 to 200 experts and thought leaders from our community together to reimagine how future ocean mapping could and should be done. And I really felt like that was transformational in the sense of talking to each other and working together on solutions for our mutual good and benefit. And I really hadn't seen that before, and this began a really focused effort to try to break down some of these silos. Next slide, please. And of course, it was the Forum for Future Ocean Floor Mapping that gave birth to Seabed 2030, with the goal of 100% of the ocean floor map by 2030. This text here on the bottom I grabbed because, again, it speaks specifically to collaboration. So Seabed 2030 cannot map the entire seafloor or ocean by itself. Cooperation and collaboration is key. The time has come for all of us, international organizations, universities, non-governmental organizations, maritime industries, youth organizations, and citizens to support Seabed 2030. Next slide. And from Seabed 2030 emerged the UN Ocean Decade, obviously a separate initiative, but with a close linkage. And with the Ocean Decade, the vision was to have the science we need for the ocean we want. And again, very focused on collaboration and cross-sectoral cooperation in achieving that mission. Again, from the UN Ocean Decade, if the Ocean Decade is to succeed, we need to do more. We are calling on our United Nations partners, scientists, governments, philanthropists, industry, civil society, and indigenous and local knowledge holders from across the globe to join this incredible movement. Next slide, please. One more. So, Seabed 2030, the UN Ocean Decade. As soon as the UN Ocean Decade was launched in 2021, it had a call for actions that they would endorse, and these had a specific criteria to be considered for endorsement. Seabed 2030 submitted an application and was successful and became an officially and formally endorsed action of the UN Ocean Decade. So now we have really Seabed 2030 feeding into the UN Ocean Decade and ultimately collectively trying to address SDG 14 and other Sustainable Development Goals. Highlighting here one of the criteria for selection and endorsement of these actions was to strengthen existing or create new partnerships across nations and or between diverse ocean actors, including users of ocean science. So I think this is a real credit to Seabed 2030 to be recognized as having that foundational component and to be selected and recognized by the UN Ocean Decade for endorsement as an official and formal action. Next slide, please. So while all of this is going on, and I think Seabed 2030, the UN Ocean Decade, have done a very good job at trying to promote this collaborative model and cooperation, coordination among these various actors and from the various sectors. But we also have a favorable environment for this collaboration and for public-private partnerships in general. And this is driven in part by the unprecedented awareness of the oceans and human impacts on the ocean. So in these last 5 years, 6 years, obviously I think climate change has become increasingly visible and the public is increasingly aware of the impacts to them from climate change. But there are other factors here as well that are leading to this favorable environment. One is the expansion of the sustainable ocean economy. Another is expertise, resources, and activities to leverage across all sectors. Increasing investment in ocean tech and innovation. I mentioned the increasing focus on cross-sectoral collaboration that has been largely driven by Seabed 2030 and the UN Ocean Decade. And then, as Duncan mentioned this morning, corporate sustainability and ESG becoming increasingly important to the commercial sector and private sector. Next slide, please. So I think we really have a good message at the right time. And again, this unprecedented awareness of the oceans and human impacts on the oceans is coming at a very good time. Next slide, please. I won't read all of these here, but I think most people in this room, probably everybody in this room, recognizes the value proposition that comes from ocean mapping and its benefits that it can deliver. So there are clearly environmental benefits, socioeconomic benefits, risk mitigation benefits, and knowledge economy benefits. And we as a community need to be constantly promoting these benefits so that society at large continues to see, or at least increasingly sees, that connection between the ocean and climate. Next slide, please. I stole this slide from Seabed 2030. You may have seen it before. It's often used to kind of convey the point of how we will achieve 100% coverage of the seafloor to be mapped by 2030. A plus B plus C equals 100%. A representing data that is already in GEDCO. B represents data that exists but is not yet in GEDCO, and we recognize that there is still data in various sectors, government, academic, private sector, that exists that has yet to make it to GEDCO. And then C are those bits beyond that that have yet to be mapped. The data just doesn't exist. And through these components, we will achieve 100% mapping seafloor by 2030. Next slide, please. So first, looking at the B component, the existing data not already in GEDCO, I think we can acknowledge that Seabed 2030 has done a very good job in this area. We have gone from 6% to roughly 24% coverage in the last few years, and the majority, not all, but the majority of that data has actually been liberated from archives and brought into GEDCO from sources where that data already exists. But we need to continue to push for this, and knowing and recognizing that there's still data to be made available. So there's this communication, education, engagement is critical to unlocking the existing data. And that can be done through different methods. I've listed them here. Again, I won't read them all, but you can see that the approach for different sectors is slightly different. And for example, the channels and approach for government and academic may be a little different than private sector and foundations, as an example. Next slide, please. I wanted to raise this point because it's another Ocean Decade activity that I think is directly related to our goal to try to get existing data from the private sector into the public domain. And that is this new Ocean Decade corporate data group. It was announced at the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon in June, and is in the process of being stood up now. It is being established by the Secretariat of IOC UNESCO, and it will focus on increasing public access to private sector data through the development of equitable frameworks and mechanisms. So we're trying to create an ecosystem that will incentivize and motivate private sector sharing and access to their data. It'll be comprised of 15 to 20 different companies, private sector organizations that are operating globally, that are forward-leaning on sustainability, and all hold large amounts of data. These actors will come from various sectors within the private sector, so there will be some from the traditional oil and gas industry, some from the offshore wind industry, some from fisheries and agriculture, some from submarine telecommunications. And they will come together and work as a collective to try to create this new environment that will facilitate and motivate this sharing and providing public access to private data. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah. So the membership of that group will be announced by the end of the year. You'll recognize most of those names, I'm pretty sure. And the first meeting is scheduled for Q1 2020. Next slide, please. Now moving on to new data collection. Crowdsourced bathymetry was obviously discussed and mentioned by Jen earlier. And I won't kind of go into that here again, but that is one of the sources for getting new data and has tremendous power, of course, as well. Next slide, please. Then there are also systematic surveys that will be required. So even if we do the best job ever in getting all data currently held into JETCO and Seabed 2030, and we have all the success in the world with regards to crowdsourced bathymetry, there's still going to be gaps that will have to be filled in by systematic surveys. And you can imagine there are resources in governments, foundation, private sector, and academia to accomplish that. Next slide, please. There are clearly collaboration opportunities in the private sector, and again, Duncan mentioned that, but just to quickly highlight that there is ocean mapping data being collected at scale globally in support of these activities. So everyday data is being collected globally and could be made available through various mechanisms, including co-investment, public-private partnership opportunities. Next slide, please. So the way ocean mapping will soon be done, and I say soon, I think we're almost there, right? This is similar to the prior graphic, but you can see now all of this data going into JETCO. Sectors fund their own mapping initiatives to support their own needs and are willing to share the data. So that's kind of important and the first step there, but that's not only the desired end state. So next slide, please. The way ocean mapping should be done, co-investment, co-design, and coordination in ocean mapping with all data shared and publicly accessible. So again, you can see the various sectors here, but then there's a coordinating body, and this coordinating body could be coordinating and managing co-investment of funds, and then managing and coordinating the collective resources to ensure that there is a appropriately managed and well coordinated collection of this mapping data. All this is going then into JETCO. Next slide, please. So just kind of to wrap up here, then this is a graphic that kind of conveys that model. This is a conceptual approach for a truly collaborative ocean mapping environment. And it's a concept only at this point, but it's been discussed and starting to develop within JETCO. And it's the concept of this International Ocean Mapping Alliance, which would bring together resources as well as investment from philanthropy or foundations, the private sector, government, and then even other private donor sources. And this work has kind of come out of some of the work within JETCO with regards to the fundraising working group. So I think this is a great way to aspire and a desired end state that we can hopefully move towards. It's what I think we would all like to see and hope to see. Next slide. Conclude with this quote: individually we are one drop, together we are an ocean. So thanks for your time. I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks very much, Kathy. So our next speaker for the panel is going to be Stephen Hull of Seabed 2030. And we'll save our questions for the end. We'll have about 10 minutes where we can have a bit of discussion.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Right, I'll either stand here or over there, wherever you guys want me, just point me in the right direction. So next slide, please, if it's right. Okay. They're doing a grand job. Literally have their AV equipment left locked in marquee that we were in this morning, and advising frantically all through the lunch hours. 10 out of 10. I don't know if we can't even get home because this car keeps locked in the garage as well. Right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about how Seabed 2030 is going to fit into the UN Ocean Decade. Now, in my previous life, I served for a couple of years as a vice chair of UNESCO's Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. And in that period, together with people like Peter Horgan and Craig McLean and Ariane Troisi and various others, a lot of time was spent in bars, restaurants, all the usual places where officers of IOC hang out, discussing how do we take a real legacy for the work of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, for that broader marine science community in both the public and private sector throughout the world. And out of those sessions, particularly in a very good bar in Utrecht, eventually became the embryo of what we now call the UN Ocean Decade. And many of you are now here, at least in part, because of projects that are decade projects funded by the Ocean Decade. And the Seabed 2030 itself is a decade-endorsed program. So I'm just going to go through a little bit about how Seabed 2030 is going to be able to work with that project to give it real legs, not after 2030, but after 2040, 2050, and so on. Next slide, please. Now, many of you will have seen this slide. It's still the best projection that anybody uses, I think, for really trying to get across that this is planet ocean, that we all live on a single, great, big, wet, aquatic planet where virtually everything you see from space is water. The green of the plants, the white of the ice, the various shades of colour of the ocean itself. All of these things are water-based. You know, the visible bare rock is a relatively small part of this planet. And it's amazing. It's a privilege to live here, and if none of that water was there, none of us would be here today. So we need to learn a lot more about it, and the techniques and technologies that we use to explore this world are the ones that will get us under the ice of Jupiter's moon Europa, and under the ice of Enceladus, under the ice of other worlds that we discovered, centuries from now. Techniques we are learning today will be things that humankind used to explore the universe. It's amazing. They'll be reading in their textbooks on Planet X 300-400 years from now that the first time that kind of instrument was used was under the ice of, offshore Greenland or offshore Antarctica, back on Earth, and now we're using the evolved version of it today. So we're doing cool stuff that's going to leave a legacy into the future. Next slide, please. So it's worth, when you have some time, downloading and having a look at the UN Ocean Implementation Plan summary. It sets out in detail what the objectives of the program are, what are the kind of things it wants to try and develop over the next 10 years. And some of it is pretty common sense, the clean ocean, the healthy and resilient ocean, productive, predictive, safe, accessible, inspiring, engaging. And many of you, with various forms of work, are hitting those targets day to day. I'll move over here because I can't read the other side from there. But it's these 10 are the key. These are the deliverables that the program will ultimately be assessed as to whether or not it was successful for. Pollutants. And for that, we need to know a lot about coastal imagery. The ecosystems, mapping is central to it. The classic line, you cannot manage what you haven't measured. Food from the ocean. Again, we need to know about the shape of the seabed and all kinds of factors there. Ocean economy, mapping intensive, particularly if, as was mentioned this morning, if we are forced by material shortages to have to go into the world of seabed mining, and that's by no means certain yet, but it's possible, we may well need to know that kind of information. Defence, of course, ocean economy, full stop, whether you're looking at energy supplies, mineral resources, being able to access the offshore wind farms, laying your cables, your pipelines, access to ports and harbours, all of these things need to know. Ocean climate nexus, the aspects of how the ocean and the atmosphere interact. Ocean-related risks, all the loss. I spoke to a geophysicist the other day who was recounting almost tremors of fear. He said, I got given a job early in my career, he said, to find out were there any gas hydrates in an area where we put this particular drilling rig down in Asian waters. He wouldn't give me the exact location. And he said they put the rig in, it started drilling, and suddenly the water turned to froth. And of course, they'd hit a gas pocket that had been missed in the initial survey. And a few hours later, the entire rig had disappeared, merrily sunk to the bottom of the sea. At the time, he was 23, 24 years old, his first big job. and he thought, that's it, I'm toast. But when they went back and did the surveys, they found out there was a particular unusual feature that he, particularly at his level of inexperience, would not have been able to pick up. But with modern technology, with better mapping, that particular risk would have been avoided. They'd have never lost that platform. Ocean observing, ocean digital representation, capacity development, behavioural change, all of these things, ocean decade challenges. Next slide, please. So how does the ocean decade all join up? And some of you may be involved in these, but probably not many. So first of all, there's something called the Ocean Decade Coordination Unit, DCU. That's based at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission in Paris. That acts as the hub to bring all this stuff together. Very ably led by people like Alison Clausen's there, and various others, the characters that we work with quite a lot. You then have a decade advisory board providing strategic technical advice. That's currently about 15 people working on the advisory board, and that's a nice mix of industry, government, academia feeding into that board. You then have the Ocean Decade Alliance, the group of partners tasked with catalysing the large-scale commitments. That includes the Seabed 2030 partners such as Food Group, it includes the Schmidt Ocean Institute. You then have the Decade Coordination Offices, 5 Ocean Decade Collaborative Centres, and we have Decade Implementing Partners. These are people who've signed up to do just that little bit more, which includes at the moment Norway, Sweden, the Republic of Korea, Japan, Portugal, Canada, Rev Ocean, Food Grow again, and Panerai. If anybody wants a nice diver's watch or something, you can say you're working on an Ocean Decade project and see if they'll give you a little bit extra, or a little bit off. Next slide, please. So, what are the Decade Collaborative Centres? First one, DCC stands for Decade Collaborative Centre or Coordination Centre. First one, North East Pacific Ocean, is hosted by the Tula Foundation of British Columbia, Canada, and that's focusing on all 10 of those decade challenges. So any of you working in that North East Pacific region, just Google DCC NEPO, North East Pacific Ocean, speak to the Tula Foundation, they'll be very, very keen to hear from you. Then you've got the DCC OCS, Ocean Climate Solutions. It's hosted by Ocean Visions, who are Georgia Tech and the Georgia Aquarium in the USA. They're going to be coordinating the decade actions focused on solutions to ameliorate climate change, enhance food security, and build climate resilience in ecosystems and communities. Easy. So they're going to have their work cut out for the next few years. DCC OCC, that's the Ocean Climate Nexus. This is focused very much in China, hosted by the First Institute of Oceanography, plus the Climate International Project Office and others. And that's to enhance understanding of oceans and climate and generate solutions to mitigate, adapt, and build resilience against climate change. There's then another one, Ocean Prediction. That's hosted by Mercator International in France, and they're going to be facilitating engagement with the ocean prediction community. And finally, DCC CR, Coastal Resilience. That's led by Nadia Panardi, hosted at the University of Bologna in Italy, and that's to increase the community resilience to coastal hazards, reducing storm surges, tsunami, and rising sea levels. Next one, please. So, how will Seabed 2030 work with these decade collaborative centres? Well, first of all, one of the deliverables that's mentioned in that, that initial brochure that introduces the whole project is to create something called the Ocean Decade Digital Ecosystem. They'll come up with a better acronym in time, but that's what it's standing at the moment. Digital ecosystem. It's very much in its early stages. And eventually it's intended to embrace all kinds of ocean data. It's a bit of a digital twin, really. So it's the physical, the chemical, the biogeochemical, the eDNA work that people are doing, the biological, the bathymetric, where our community comes into it, the socio-economic and governance. Somehow it all gets fed into this Ocean Decade digital ecosystem. I don't think it's got very far yet, but it is one of the things we'll expect to see as the decade goes on. So we're going to be developing our Seabed 2030 MOUs with all of those regional and thematic centres. We'll help them build bridges with the Seabed survey community in the public-private sector. There's an additional centre that's just about to be announced. I was told I am allowed to tell you it exists this week, and that's going to be one for the Indian Ocean, which will be in Hyderabad, hosted by Unicos. And my colleague Jamie happened to be in Hyderabad a couple of weeks ago on different business, but had the opportunity to see the facilities they have there, which are world class. You know, there's some amazing tech down there. We're going to be educating, we'll inform, we'll facilitate how the Ocean Decade community learns about GEDCO and reiterates that you can't manage what you haven't measured message, as all of those Decade Collaborative Centres have developed their work programs. Next, please. So next steps, we're going to develop those initial MOUs with the new bodies as they come into operation. So far we've spoken to the heads of the Northeast Pacific Centre, the one for coastal resilience, and the Indian Ocean Region 1. So we're at the early stages of developing our agreements with them. We'll work with the Seabed 2030 Centre heads and partners to see how we can all collaborate effectively with these Ocean Decade network centres, especially in areas where it isn't already taking place. And we'll keep all of you informed, engaged, and let you know what's happening so that you can join in the fun as well. Next one, please. That's it from me. So hopefully short and sweet, and I'll be very happy to answer any of your questions later on. So thank you.
Good timing, I'm very impressed. So our final speaker of this panel is Nick Lambert of MLA International, and I'll hand you over to Nick.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you to Team NOC for getting us here this afternoon. I'm very impressed by what you've achieved, coping with cybersecurity issues and a fire. What sort of thing you don't want for a conference. My name is Nick Lambert. Can I have my slides, please? We're just struggling to get them. I'll waffle while you're doing it. My name is Nick Lambert. My background is all marine. Wait till we be in line with that. All marine and maritime. And I have a bit of dabbled in hydrography a bit. I've set up we have set up a Blue Economy Solutions company. This is not a commercial pitch. This is to explain the evidence that I'm going to offer you in this short presentation. We're a Blue Economy. Oh, thank you. We're a Blue Economy. 2 hands. That's multitask. We're a Blue Economy Solutions company, so it's a mixture of Blue Economy consultancy, and we've also done our own projects. In other words, we've conceived something, we've gone out and funding the project delivered. So it's a combination of consultancy and practical experience. I'm going to be specific because one or two of the examples I'm going to give you are going to come from that background. Can I just do a quick trawl, a little bit of research? Could anybody who's not involved in marine science or bathymetry or hydrography, please put their hands up? One at the back, 2 at the back, thank you. The reason I've asked them, 3 of you, thank you, Christy. The reason I've asked that is not to catch you out, it's because I'm going to talk about the stakeholder base that lies behind the Blue Economy. So in this room, there are no venture capitalists, there are no investors, there are no insurers, there are no bankers, there's nobody who I would call M25 person. So that's the person, male or female, that drives around the M25, not realising the car they're in, the clothes they're wearing, the fuel that's in the car, all come by sea, nor do they understand that they're only about 20 miles from the sea. So it's those people, it's that stakeholdership that we've got to get a handle on. If one of you out there wants to set up an aquaculture company in the UK, who do you go and talk to? There isn't an obvious place to go and talk to for that sort of investment. There isn't an incubator system for that. These are the sorts of people that are coming our way. So the UN Decade of the Ocean, I love it. I think the work they're doing is fantastic. I think it's brilliant. The Seabed 2030 is associated with it, but I think they've got a tiger by the tail. It's actually the century of the ocean. We are now in the century of the ocean. And the demand for the work that you do and the data you provide is only going to increase. And I suspect that it won't increase, or the rate at which we can provide data to inform this sector is not going to be faster. unless we change how we go about it. So now you're going to tell me which one I'm shooting. I put this one up. It's basically all the big things. 90% of everything, 70% of the planet covered by water, all those things. I love the spill hazard protection. I wish that Steve hadn't put that before me. We know more about the face of the moon and Mars than we know about the oceans, and there's lots and lots of stuff going on out there. I particularly highlight renewables and offshore infrastructure. So if you go out there and ask in the streets, these are the sort of things people will tell you about, probably if we talk about blue economy or about our seas and oceans. And they'll probably talk about the damage that we do to it. So there's a big, gloomy story that goes with the oceans. It starts with ocean acidification. It goes on to rising sea levels. We are already suffering rising sea levels. That's happening. If you live in the Thames Valley, you are experiencing rising sea levels. And of course, there's all the saga that goes with illegal fishing and all the other illegal things that go on at sea. You could see this as gloom and doom, and if you allow it to go that way, it is gloom and doom. But actually, I would prefer to offer it as opportunity. But before we go any further, we're going to need to change our attitude from a take, make, and dispose, a linear extraction of resource from our ocean, and then disposal of that resource elsewhere, or God forbid, into the ocean. We've got to change it to a more holistic, regenerative approach, and with a just transition for the people who derive their livelihood from the seas and the oceans. So that's going to need data, and this will be a common theme of this presentation. The technology is not the issue. Anybody from the space sector here? Ish. Thank you. We've got the technology, we've got these amazing sensors in space, we've got the AI and the big data and the ability to crunch data. We can do analysis in a way that we've never been able to do it before. So it's data and how you handle data is not the issue, and it gives us sea vision. Most of my naval career, we spent our time worrying about the fact that the sea blind, and that's why we didn't have a bigger Navy. People didn't understand that M25 person thing, wasn't understanding what goes on. But we really do now see anything that we want to see. If you throw enough beams at it, you can have all the data you could possibly want. You've just got to get the beams and throw it. And so the blue economy is now an unfolding concept. It's an evolving concept. When I started out on the blue economy about 10 years ago, people took me to one side, patted me on the head and said, "Now Nick, we'll get over it. It's a past concept now. We're doing something else." We're not. The blue economy really is about deriving social and economic benefit from the ocean, from the coastal zones, which is where people live, primarily from the continental shelf, which is where we can get to, and how it interfaces with the land. And seabed is only a little bit of that. There's a water column above it, there's an air column above that, and it interfaces with the land, and it interfaces with people. And so I've given you this example of the blue economy as a concept. It's the old EU DG Mari concept. It's slightly out of date now, but I think it's one of the best representations. But what we're trying to achieve is similar to that quotation from the UN Decade of the Ocean. We're trying to derive social and economic benefit from the ocean, whilst ideally regenerating the marine environment. So it's not just sustainability. Whatever you do out there should ideally regenerate it. In other words, leave it in a better state than when you started. So lots of people get cranked up about blue growth. I don't think actually it is blue growth. I think it's about doing what we do in the ocean now, and particularly in the coastal zones now, and doing it better, and addressing it better. I'm just going to check what my next slide was. Oh, it's value of the blue economy. There are zillions of different numbers out there. When I started out on this, it was sort of around about 30 billion, 40 billion, 50 billion. Now it's up to 3.5 trillion, 4 trillion. 40 million jobs in the ocean as a number. I don't believe that. That's not big enough. I just don't believe it's big enough. So we just don't know. And the issue is, we need more data. And it's not just us as marine scientists or hydrographers or maritime operators. It's that M25 person needs more data. Because until there's more data and more evidence, people are not going to invest. Until there's money in there, the likes of Seabed 2030 and UN Decade of the Ocean are great initiatives, but they ain't going to happen until investment comes along. And investment's not going to come along until there are investable data sets out there. In other words, you've given me sufficient information to make me bold enough to invest in the blue economy. And the capital opportunity is really starting to emerge now. People are really starting to think about it. There are several agencies out there who are trying to bring terrestrial, I'll call them terrestrial investors, not meant rudely, but their mindset tends to be terrestrial. And they're starting to see some untapped reports out there which are demonstrating that there is a capital opportunity. There is an opportunity to invest. We're starting to see carbon bonds, blue bonds, all those sorts of concepts are coming to the fore. And it is beginning to be a viable concept. But more data is required. More evidence is required to get those venture capitalists, to get those banks to put dosh on the table to get a project run. There's loads and loads out there. The most recent UNCTAD report, forgive me, I can't remember the year, it's only a year or two old, identified a $2.5 trillion export potential in the blue economy. But one of the most important things they said was more data and better reporting required. So this is where the people who analyse finances and decide on investments need better data. And Seabed 2030 and UN Decade of the Ocean are a part of that. Governments are really waking up to the fact they have sustainable blue economies. Most of them, particularly island states and coastal states, the smaller ones, they tend to know the what and the why. They know they have an EEZ. They know there's stuff in it, but they're not quite sure what it is. And they know why they want to do something with it, because they want to get a better livelihood for their people. They don't know how to do it. And this is why I referenced us as a Blue Economy Solutions Company. We've just completed studies for the World Bank into baselining the blue economies of Pakistan and Jamaica. And in both cases, as a result of the work we did with them, we tried to evaluate, we needed to understand whether or not they had more data. They needed more data. And the approach that these strategies are coming up with is this holistic approach to the blue economy, almost inevitably centered on renewable or zero emissions, zero carbon energy, and linking that across to the development of their blue economies. So blue economy is not a case of government saying, I've got fisheries, I've got some tourism, I do shipping, I've got a port and a harbour, and I'd like to do some aquaculture. That's not a blue economy. That is the current stovepipes rebadged as the blue economy. A blue economy is where you say, I'm going to put a wind farm in the North Sea. It's going to cover up a very large patch of water. I'm going to declare it as a maritime protected area to recover fish stocks. I'm also going to link it to aquaculture, and I'm going to use the aquaculture lines for, say, shellfish in such a way that it prevents downstream scouring from the wind towers. And I think I will also try and bring in an element of ecotourism, so people can out see the lovely windmills and see the fish, and we'll have an artificial reef in there. That is a blue economy regenerative approach to a sea space. But if you go to a wind farm developer and say, would you like to put a fish farm in with your wind farm? They're like, no. Too risky. I'm a wind farm, not a fish farm. So again, you see this is where we've got to provide the evidence that this can be done so that there's a possibility of creating this regenerative approach before somebody shoots me on the finished. So a holistic regenerative approach and a just transition. For those of you who've not heard this just transition phrase, this is all about if you are about to displace a particular livelihood of a particular community, you do it in a just way. So whatever you take away from them, you replace with something else. Think of artisanal fisheries as an example. Regenerative finance is out there, and we're starting to see more and more examples of this. This is a graph in the bottom right-hand corner here. Just work on the basis of the big number on the right. That's the growth in blue economy type incubators in the States over the 2015 to 2019 period. So we're really starting to see startup companies out there, and we're really starting to see them being invested in, and they really need the data that Seabed 2030 provides to, or could provide to. nearly finished. So, I put up the, I've been thinking about this for quite a long time. I need to do some reading into history. But this is the Wild West. And we all talk about the ocean being the Wild West, or the wild oceans, and we allow illegal behaviours to take place on the ocean. So I've thought about how it happened in the States. And to start with, there was 30 years of the Wild West where people were young, single, and they were having a great party, and they were staking lumps of land, and they were looking for diamonds and gold and all the rest of it. They had a wonderful time. And it changed over time, because first of all, they got communications, then they got the Pony Express, then they got some railways, and then families came along. They started having families. And once they started having families, they couldn't party in the bar and do all the things that those settlers did in those early days. They had to settle down, and that brought regulation. And I can't help thinking that's beginning to happen in the ocean, because we have seaweed, we can see what's going on. So it's very difficult to have that party without being seen. And we're starting to settle there now, because we're putting offshore infrastructure out in huge amounts. And we're going to see more and more of it. So I think, I'm going to read into it and do a blog or something, because I think there is a parallel here. It'll take a bit longer than 30 years, but I think that we will see the whole of the ocean governed in due course. So what we need data for is to value the natural capital of the ocean. That's a really important point. So you've understood what's out there, you can't value it, you can't get investment, you can't do anything with it. Once you've got that, you've got some evidence, you can build an economic strategy, you can understand the social, economic, and the environmental benefits of having that strategy. You can estimate the return on investment and when you're going to see it, and then you can get that investor to put some money on the table. And once you start to see some money, you'll then be able to get some decision makers to decide how they're going to use it. Seabed winning the sales. Gary's here. Gary has led on this project. We've had the privilege of being involved in the feasibility studies and the implementation stage. So we've done the first stage of research, questionnaires, and online surveys. Thank you to everybody who contributed to those surveys. We've done some detailed modelling subsequently. We're now on to phase 3, which Jamie signed off a few days ago, and now we're looking forward to how we do benefits analysis and determination of global prioritisation. I'm sure you've had a conversation about whether or not 2030 will be the date that we map the whole ocean. I don't think we need to map the whole ocean by 2030. I think we need to have a long-term program that's in place to map the ocean over the ocean century. But we certainly do need to know the priorities so that we can start to allocate some of that funding. We're going to need money in the system, so until we've got priorities on why we need it, what are the social and economic benefits of it, what are the environmental benefits of it, then we'll get money in. Then we'll be able to go out there and start mapping those priority areas. And I would hazard to argue it probably ain't going to be in latitude 40, 50 south in the deepest Pacific Ocean, unless there's some really important lesser spotted flip-flop that's going to prevent us from having climate change. We're going to be doing it in continental shelf zones where it affects livelihoods and well-being and the environment. The answer to ocean acidification, for example, is not global, it is regional, and it's in the coastal zones. Phase 3, Objective 8, nearly finished. We're going to push out a second online survey. Please contribute to it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much for that, Nick. Sorry for rushing you up again. I do invite our panel members to come and sit up here beside me. So, David Miller, Steve, and Nick, would you like to take a seat?
Then I have to move them. I'll wake you up.
I'm so tired.
Okay, so I actually have a couple of questions here, but I might go through these first. So, question for all of you. Maybe this is what most appropriate for Steve, but what might the role of the decade collaboration centres and organisations such as Symposium look like beyond 2030?
I think beyond 2030, these things, they're establishing a baseline. We're going to use this decade to create databases that help us move on to 2030. 2040s, the 2050s, the 2060s and beyond. So all of them are going to continue. The names might change. You know, they might take on new labels. You know, people will come and go, people will change, institutes will change. But what we're all undertaking at the moment is just the beginning. You know, it's taken us nearly 200 years to get where we are today. It's not we're going to magically stop in 2030. It carries on. So, you know, I think nobody needs to worry that their job's going to disappear at the end of the decade. We literally only just begun.
I see the decade and the decade coordination centers as being kind of a fabric and a unifier, right? So it's meant to bring people together around common geographies or topics and themes and create relationships that may not have historically existed. And I think this is extremely important for sustainable solutions, right? You need to have relationships. They're not going to suddenly stop at 2030. These are going to be foundational relationships that will start delivering value under the decade, but those relationships will be sustained well beyond, right? And I think it's quite a clever approach, actually. The decade is really trying to facilitate conversations and communities coming together around mutual interests, whether that's geography or thematic issues.
Thanks. I agree with both my fellow panelists, and I think they're a great start, they're a great foundation, but I don't think we're going to map the ocean and we're going to achieve the blue economy stuff I talked about without money. And I don't think that institutions are going to attract that money. So I think we're going to need an investable joint venture of some sort of other with a really ambitious financial investment plan and a program of data gathering to achieve what's required to feed the blue economy. That funding can come from two things. It can come from climate change, where governments will start to panic because sea levels are rising and ocean acidification has got really, really, really bad, so they're going to put money in to fix it. So then there'll be cash. And the other thing is we make an attractive business case which gets investors to put money on the table. And then that money will start to go in and the benefits of those institutions will be seen and then the film will kick off. But until big money goes into this, it's not going to happen.
Actually, another question for Nick there. How do you think you could prioritise a survey programme to actually support the blue economy approach?
Yeah, good question. That's, again, based around this concept of what generates environmental, social, and economic impact simultaneously, and that regenerative approach as well. So it's that business of understanding how the blue economy works and then identifying where the opportunities lie. So I'm a particular fan of the Irish blue economy plan, which I would recommend you have a look at.
No.
Hang on, then you're right. The Irish.
I'm sorry.
The Irish. Okay, well, any one of your ministers will stand up in public and tell you that Ireland is 1/10 land and 9/10 sea. And that's because they have a wonderful strategy called Harnessing Our Ocean Wealth, which they kicked off in 2012. And every year they have an annual review where they say, this is what we've achieved in GVA, this is what we've got in the way of companies, this is what we've got in the way of jobs. And these are the social, economic, and environmental benefits we deliver. It's not without its politics, with a lot of politics there. But as an example of how it can be done, that's really good. And it's those sorts of data sets. And when I talk about data, I'm not talking about soundings, I'm talking about data that becomes information that allows you to make investment decisions.
We have still around 3 minutes from it. Does anyone have any questions in the audience? Kim?
Yes, it might go to you, Nick, again. Sorry, actually, any one of you. How do you think we'll leverage off, we have 15 countries that are part of the high-level panel for ocean sustainability. It's driven by the industry. So how do you think our community can leverage off this? Because by 2025, each of those 15 countries have committed to a sustainable ocean plan. I know Australia is moving in that direction. Will they be ambitious enough? I don't know. But so what influence can we have on that, and how can we leverage of this, if you agree? Thanks.
That's a really good question. The best way to go about it, I'm repeating myself now, is to develop that commercial side to it. So stuff that wiggles around the water column, really, really important stuff. But where's the commercial benefit of it? So whilst there will be a scientific benefit, you will understand it, you've got to go out there and tell that industrial community what the opportunity is, so we can get the investment in. So we really need to pull together academia, government, and industry. And academia, and now please don't take this the wrong way, because I love all scientists, I love wonderful, especially you lot. But you've got to do it because of more than pure science. You've got to do it because you want to fix problems, and the only way you can fix problems is by getting money in there, and you've got to justify that money. David, you might have a better question.
It kind of addresses the question, but it also reinforces what you said. I strongly believe that you kind of have to go where the market's taking you. Right? And, the good news, and you mentioned kind of the climate challenge, and that would be a government problem to solve. I think we're starting to see significant investment going into solving climate challenges, right? And that requires data. I believe that some of these commercial opportunities will be moving more and more into the climate mitigation space, carbon capture and storage, which is carbon dioxide removal. And these are going to be programs that will attract investment. There will be commercial, private sector activity happening in the locations, and of course, it's good for the planet, and the governments need that as well. So I really see, and it kind of ties into the high-level panel as well. I think these nations, 15 nations, will be leading those efforts, and we will be seeing kind of a convergence between sustainability of traditional considerations and then the climate mitigation aspects coming together in the
Yeah, it's a Rumsfeldian issue, because the markets, or the investors in markets don't know the market's there. So you've got to bring them to the market. You've got to show them this. They don't know what it is you've got, and when they do find out, they'll want it. So we've got to bring the market to them.
And this will just have final comments.
Sure,
That's
I
okay.
was just going to say, we often use that mantra, you can't manage what you haven't measured. To that, we just say you also can't manage what you haven't valued. So, we have to ensure that people understand the value of these activities and resources as well.
Thank you very much to our panelists today, Steve, Dave, and Nick. Thank you very much.